Hello and welcome to this interview series ahead of Data Center World, taking place on the 12th and 13th of March at Excel London. My name is Rebecca Uffindell, editor at Techarati, and today my guest is Jon Summers, the scientific lead of data centers at Rise Institute of Sweden. Jon will be making an appearance at Data Center World, but today we will be discussing three inventions throughout history that have had an impact on his life. So welcome to this interview, Jon, and thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for the invite, Rebecca. Yeah, nice to be here. Yeah.
You're welcome. And so, for the first invention, what is it you'd like to discuss with us?
Well, I think I mentioned packet switching technology. Yeah. And for those who don't know, I think this goes back actually even before my time. I'm quite an old guy, but seen a lot of things change in the space. But it's really the thing that underpins the actual resilience, if you like, of the interconnect that we have between digital infrastructure, part of the digital infrastructure today. So when telecommunications first started, it was a point-to-point communication. But packet switching, the whole idea, as I understand it, it's not my area of expertise, but this was something that I read a long time ago about inventing the internet. There was a book on inventing the internet, was that, packets of data are sent from A to B, but there are multiple routes because we have a lot of connectivity between multiple points. And so if one of the packets didn't make it, there would be a request to resend it, and it could go via another route. And it actually sprung out of, if anybody remembers the film Dr. Strangelove and the fact that the chain of command had broken before the launch of the nuclear missiles at the end of the movie. It's a black and white movie with Peter Sellers. And the chain of command was broken because the communication technology we're using those days was end to end. And if you break that end to end communication, there's no other way of maintaining the communication. So it's building resilience in our telecommunications. And the invention is really attributed to, I believe it's AT&T at the time, an American company, but there was a lot of activity in the UK on this in the 1960s. And there is a very famous researcher, a physicist called Donald Davis, who was a fellow of the Royal Society, a Welsh physicist. And he actually, simultaneously at the same time as the US was presenting this technology, he came up with the same idea. And he wanted the then Labour government, I believe, to fund the National Physics Laboratories being interconnected with what would be reclassed as the first generation internet in the UK. But unfortunately, that didn't happen through the 60s wasn't a good time for the UK. It was the poor man of Europe at the time. Yeah.
That's a great history you provided us with your packet switching, and what a great first invention. And so my first question for you is, how do you see packet switching continuing to play a role in the efficient transmission of data within increasingly complex data centers?
Well, you see, the data center is where information is processed and stored. And of course, inside the data center, there's a lot of telecommunications between all the devices. But from data center to data center communication, packet switching is so essential. And I think when I read the book Inventing the Internet, I think because it came out of military technology, it was because we wanted to avoid this chain of command issue being broken during a period of war, nuclear war, which was described. You have a very resilient system, and maybe if it was born out of the commercial world, maybe it would not be so resilient. So I see it as a technology, in my personal experience and what I've read and what I've talked about with people who work more closely with this technology, is that it's an essential component because it joins everything together. How would the user be able to interact with the data center if it wasn't for packet switching technology? Yeah,
that's so true. And it's funny how you mentioned that this technology was born from like the military, because we see that quite often when it comes to technologies that we now use every day, like GPS, for example. Do you think there's anything here and now that we will be seeing coming into play that using through military operations or anything? I know it's probably kept quite under wraps, I would assume. But do you feel like there's something on the horizon that's going to be kind of announced to the general public that may have originated from this kind of era?
Because I think that era has sort of passed where, I don't know. I mean, obviously, the
Mm.
military is now making huge advances technologically from the environment, the ecosystem that's been created with digital technologies, you know. So I think not necessarily in terms of packet switching, but probably, you know, when we start putting digital infrastructure in very in remote locations, you need good protection, and so physical protection is always one thing that I think the military is probably very good at, you know, because you want to, you know, make something EMP proof, bomb proof, whatever you want, you know, so that that infrastructure never dies or never disappears. Yeah, but you know, I think military technology is more expensive. That's the problem. Is that, you know, making something more physically secure costs a lot of money and a lot of resource. So I'm not sure whether it will translate so easily into civilian life. But
Yeah, that's true. I'm
yeah,
not sure if we need
yeah.
bomb protection for houses and the like, so maybe that's a bit too far-fetched. But I guess moving a little bit onto packet switching, I think I took on a bit of a tangent there. My other question I had for you regarding this is, with the increasing focus on energy efficient data center operations, how can packet switching technologies help in optimizing the overall PUE of these facilities?
Probably not much, to be honest, because I think it's obviously a communication. But communications themselves obviously use energy, and one thing's a lot of communication, long distance communication, is done using light, which doesn't require much energy, and this is photonics. But to actually consume the data that's being transmitted, or to manipulate, or to process it, or store it, it needs to come into the electronics layer. So you have you have the photonics layer and you have the electronics layer. And when you bring it into the electronics layer, you actually use energy to do that. So that's where I would say in the data center, that's probably happening, where the fiber optic cables land, and you would need to then bring things from the optical layer or the photonics layer into the electronics layer. Now, yeah, there's all this talk about actually, you know, light being actually a thing that might save us from the huge demand on energy that our infrastructure requires today, because light does require less energy, and there's lots of disruptive technologies, I would say, that are starting to appear that work with light. So, you know, the fact that we use light as a means of telecommunication, I think it might also impact on the data center in a little bit from the fact that using optical processing components in the data center may become a reality in the future. Yeah.
That's really interesting, and especially, you know, that little bit difference could actually over time have a bigger contribution than I guess we would give that credit for. And so, moving on to your second invention, what was that you would like to discuss with us?
I think it the RSA, was it
Uh,
cryptography, or was it the World
it
Wide Web?
was, I believe, it was the World Wide Web. Your
Yeah.
second one.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So obviously, yeah, the World Wide Web. I mean, this dates me because I was around before we had access to websites, but the World Wide Web, which is a way of sharing information over the infrastructure that we have today, which is connected together by this packet switching technology, was the whole idea of it was based on what's called hypertext. So where parts of the text become hot or clickable, and it takes you down somewhere else. And the early web browsers were from the 1989, 1990, really, when it started to happen. They were static. There was nothing dynamic about the website, but you had these hot links where you could click them and go somewhere else. And it's a way of presenting information to the end user or the consumer, the reader of this. Now, what I'd like to say is that it was invented by a guy called Tim Berners-Lee, the whole idea of hypertext and the World Wide Web. Another British, I think he was a physicist of origin. Unlike Donald Davis, who is no longer alive, Tim Berners-Lee is with us today and has to give often. I think even given a talk at Data Center World or the event in London once before. I think that was a convincing way it is a life changer for a lot of people who work in the knowledge space, because knowledge then was not totally in the library, but it was at your fingertips. At your screen. But the original graphics browsers that we had in the 1990s were, if you look at them today and you look at what we have today, there was nothing dynamic about them. It was all static text, static images, etc. But it's advanced a lot since then. Yeah.
And so, how was that? Seeing that transition between the early internet to the internet now? I guess that in the span of when the technology in itself, a lot has happened in a very short span of time. How was that for you? Really, kind of growing with the inception of the internet and the World Wide Web.
Yes, I mean, because working in a university, we saw this, we had access to this way before the general public. Again, I think Tim Berners-Lee was working for CERN, which was a research organization, and he saw this a way of sharing knowledge with all the researchers from the different countries and different organizations that intersect with CERN. And again, for me as a researcher in a university, it opened up the possibility of sharing one's knowledge a little bit. It changed the way that we worked quite a bit. Now. I think what grew out of that over time, when it became more popular, now I never, there's a point where you didn't need to go to the library anymore because everything was available online, through a web browser and through the World Wide Web, But of course, it's just an application that sits on this interconnectivity that we have. The underlying part of it is this packet switching technology again. So it was making use of the telecommunications that were available of the day and that have advanced since then. And so being a researcher, you've got access to so much information at your fingertips. It makes the job a little bit more difficult because then you've got too much information. Whereas in the old days, you visit the library and you only had a little bit of information. It was digestible, yeah. But that's the nature of this kind of information system that we built over the years, yeah.
And that makes, as you said, it makes life a lot harder because there's this tension between the information that is so readily available, but then, as you say, how digestible is that? And then now with the internet and the World Wide Web, have all these much more complex infrastructures, and then with that comes the requirements for more efficient or promising thermal management systems to help cope with the increased demand. And so, do you see any of these technologies on the horizon that could be promising for helping to deal with this much more complex systems and the kind of deepening of the internet and other technologies that we have today?
Yes, I think as I said, the World Wide Web in its early days was static, so it didn't really generate much computer processing requirements, really. It was just a matter of serving data over the network, But now behind the scenes, you've got applications that are running on servers that are providing more dynamic experience when you enter a website. But I think whatever it is you're doing, whether you're streaming audio, you're streaming video now, all of this is embedded in the web browser. It's served by web servers. But I don't think they, from the point of view of, computers have got much more energy efficient over the years since the early days of the World Wide Web. And so I don't think it's really a big impact on the demand for thermal management, because there are so many other things now that are. I guess now you've got embedded AI inferencing, so you're interacting with an AI at the back end of that, which is running on more intense servers. Then that's they do say we have to be careful about what we actually use, because if you use a search engine. The search engine, obviously, like some of the famous search engines, they use a bit of energy to present to you, based on your keywords that you put into the search box, a number of web pages you can go to. But something that's probably 10 to 20 times more energy intensive is to ask a large language model like ChatGPT the same information. So if you ask the same question that you're trying to search for information about some topic, if you ask it of an AI, then that is much more energy intense. And so but the user has both at their fingertips now.
Mm.
And so the user has to make a decision about that. Do I use a search engine, which I know uses less energy, or do I use, am I lazy? I've still got the chat GPT open on my web browser. I just type it in there, and which will use more energy. And of course, energy generated in a data center requires thermal management, more intense thermal management processes. Yeah.
That's really interesting that you say that because, for me and you, we understand that AI is, as you said, a lot more intensive of the need of the energy it requires. I've seen in the media, news outlets referring to it to the general public as the amount of water that is needed for consumption that an AI uses versus, say, Google or the like. And so do you think there needs to be a bit more of an understanding and a meeting in the middle between technology spaces and the general public, so there is a deepening of the knowledge of the impacts of AI? Or do you think we're just on a natural progression to that generally being the common knowledge?
Well, I think this kind of stems to all of the applications that we use. We don't really, the general public in its entirety doesn't really know of the environmental impact of the applications that it's using. That information isn't presented to them. They don't know whether they're using one application on their phone. What implications that has to the data center that's responding to that application running on the phone. But one thing that everybody knows what to do. They know that they can look at their phone and they can see the signal intensity of the 5G connection they have, or the signal intensity of the Wi-Fi they have. Why aren't they presented with the environmental impact of the service that they're using in the same way? So, when your signal intensity drops, the speed of which you can interact with things on the internet, that starts to drop as well, because you're far away from an access point or from an antenna. But would they actually look at that and say, oh, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't use this application because it's so much more. It has a much bigger impact on environmental impact, or maybe that's just too much information for people to digest. But there are, habits. We can influence people's habits by telling them, but not everybody will listen. So it's what is the easiest route? But I think just the water consumption is a little bit erroneous, because some data centers do use a lot of water because it's part of their cooling system, but they may not be in a water stress area. They may be running a data center where there is a lot of water, with a lot of water available, and of course the water isn't destroyed; it's just transformed into the atmosphere. But it's the problem with using water is when you're running a data center which is running these intensive applications, and they're using water in a water stress area. So, and that is where the data center operator should be more cautious about the way they do things, and perhaps think about it in a different way, because whilst water might reduce your PUE, your power usage effectiveness, but it's still, as an energy associate, producing the water for spray systems, whether it's done on site, whether they've taken grey water and they've processed the water on site, it still requires energy, or whether they're just taking potable water from the water network, from the district water network. But that all is energy at the end of the day.
True. I think that's super interesting. You've given me a lot of food for thought with that one. And so moving on lastly to your final invention, do you recall what that would be?
Yes, that was the RSA, wasn't it?
It was RSA. Why have
Yeah.
you selected this one?
Well, I think because I don't know whether people know this, but RSA, I think, is named after the three guys that invented it: Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman. Yeah, so RSA. But it's a cryptography process that allows us to have communications with our bank, encrypted communication in WhatsApp, for example, end-to-end encrypted communication. And so this is very important. But although it came out in, I think it was the algorithm was available about 1977, something like that. I'm just looking on my notes here. The one thing that's important is that it was actually discovered, the whole algorithm using Diffie and Hellman's work in cryptography was discovered by a gentleman called Clifford Cox, who worked for GCHQ, governmental communications headquarters in the UK. So again, you could say that's military. It's for military purposes, but because it was kept secret, it never transpired as being named after his work. Now, it's probably a bit of hyperbole to say that it's the same algorithm, but it's the same principle, as I understand it. And that was 1973 that GCHQ was starting to use this encryption process, this encryption algorithm. And it's so key to everything we do today, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say
even this communication is encrypted as well. Yeah.
And it's another example of it being so intertwined with our day-to-day lives, where we probably don't give it enough credit for how it originated and the kind of freedom it allows us in that encryption. And also, I've picked up a little bit of a thread there. I think you've mentioned 3 of these inventions having a history within the UK. I'm guessing that was intentional.
It was, yeah. I was a little bit flying the flag, yeah. Even though I'm in Sweden at the moment, but at least I think it demonstrates that the UK was one of at the forefront of some of these technologies, that are in everybody's handheld device today. But don't really realize this, So, and I think it was, I gave a talk a long time ago about data centers, and it was in the US. And I deliberately spelled data centers, center, ER, and then I crossed it out and put RE, to make it. The thread in this talk was very much a British English. And flying the British flag, if you like.
I love that, because for our publication we use the RE too, and so I always have to go anytime we have something submitted. I have to change it to RE instead of the ER. But I do love the fact that these inventions that you selected, they have deep roots within not just like the industry space, but the commercial space, where people throughout would have been interacting with that. And so with your talk next month with Data Center World, what is it you're hoping that audiences, say people of the industry or people who have an interest in the industry, what do you hope they would learn at your session?
Well, I think because I'm on a panel session, which is future-proofing the data center, and I know moderator and I know the other panelists, and I know there's only 30 minutes. So I would say the moderator is going to have, with the panelists being quite verbose people as well, the moderator is going to have a hard time, I think, keeping us under control, because there's a lot to say about future-proofing the data center. But I work in the space which is the envelope around the IT. So the IT, I don't have an influence on research in the IT space, but it's part of the whole infrastructure, So one of the things that I would like to point out to everybody to make it future-proof is that don't be surprised that with this current growth trend with AI that is demanding more and more power, every generation of new equipment that comes out that's going to do this perform all this workload for us, don't be surprised that suddenly there's going to be a paradigm shift. And suddenly we're going to have infrastructure that doesn't need so much power, and therefore doesn't need the same level of cooling infrastructure, doesn't need heat recovery. And so be careful. So although I work on the infrastructure around the IT, I think it's very important that we track what's going on in the IT space, because that is the core of the data center. That's the engine of the data center. That's the thing that's going to generate the money, not the cooling system, not the power distribution, not the security system. Those are all necessary in order to enable it, but the IT is the one thing in the room that could suddenly change overnight, and everybody is left with their mouths open saying, what just happened?
Well, thank you so much, Jon, for your time today. It was great to discuss your inventions with you, and I'm sure everyone will be looking forward to your session at Data Center World in March.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. It was lovely to talk to you. Yeah. Thank you.